It's me, Jessica McCaskill, WBC, WBA, Super Lightweight Unified Champion of the World. I wanted to give a big shout out to The Relay on YouTube. Check it out. Great boxing talk show. Has all the info that you need. Check it out. The Relay on YouTube.
Motherfucking Relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Gennady Golovkin versus Steve Rolls. Let's talk about the fight. You know, this isn't a fight that I had very many thoughts about when it was announced. It being that, you know, Steve Rolls, in spite of being undefeated, this is not a guy who's established himself on the world scene, at the world stage. Thus, Golovkin having picked him in spite of some other opponents that are floating around, it reads to me like a tune-up fight, like a lighter touch, someone for him to shake off the cobwebs with, having not fought since the Canelo Álvarez rematch. You gotta think about it. Canelo Álvarez, he's fought about 2 times since he last squared off with Gennady Golovkin. He had that fight with Rocky Fielding, and then he unified titles with Daniel Jacobs. So for Gennady Golovkin, that's what this was. This was a tune-up fight. And in that way, I've seen worse tune-ups than this guy. You know, this guy, he's an undefeated contender, or at least he was before last night. Wasn't the worst lighter touch I've seen, let alone the worst lighter touch I've seen for Gennady Golovkin. If we're going to talk about situations where you can criticize who he decided, who he chose to fight, I'd say that Vanez Martirosyan and Kell Brook, those guys rank higher on the list of questionable opponent choices than Steve Rolls. Unheralded as Steve Rolls might be, was obviously a tune-up fight, so I didn't have too many criticisms about that. It's because, you know, at least Steve Rolls campaigns in the same weight class as Gennady Golovkin. He was an undefeated contender, whereas in the case of Vanez and Brook, you know, Vanez hadn't fought anybody in a long time. He hadn't done both fucking diddly at middleweight. Brook, he was undefeated, but that was as a welterweight. At the end of the day, this is yet another guy who, upon moving up to the middleweight division, had not done anything, had not proven anything, and had not established that he's qualified enough to share the same ring with Gennady Golovkin. So those opponent choices earned far more criticism from me, and those of you that follow this channel and have been following this channel will already know that those 2 opponent choices garnered far more criticism from me than this guy. This guy, you know, I understand that Gennady Golovkin, at 37 years old, having been out, you know, what is now...
Was out,
you know,
a while.
What was, I should say, 9 months, having not fought in a while, I understood the rhyme and the reason. It's not the worst opponent choice I've seen. It's not the worst lighter touch I've seen. And at minimum, at least he campaigned in the same prescribed weight class as Gennady Golovkin. So, in that way, I knew what purpose and function Steve Rolls was there to serve. And the most I was honestly intrigued by was how would Gennady Golovkin look now that he's no longer with his longtime trainer, Abel Sanchez. That given Gennady Golovkin's age, he's 37 years old, very experienced guy. You know, these kinds of guys, it's hard to break old habits. And him being with a new trainer, the most intrigue to me was how would he look at 37 years old under the tutelage, the training regimen of Jonathan Banks? Could Jonathan Banks get something else out of this guy? And if he can, are we going to see it against Steve Rolls? That was honestly where the majority of my interests lie. You know, I figure whether Golovkin is with Abel Sanchez or whether Golovkin is with Jonathan Banks, one way or another, he's got more than enough to beat a guy like Steve Rolls. But it's how he goes about it that had my attention. Will we see something new from this fighter? So let's talk about what we did see. Let's talk about what Golovkin put on display in last night's fight. You know, one thing I noticed almost immediately is that Golovkin's jab was not ever present in this fight. And that's saying a lot, because for Gennady Golovkin, the jab is almost his signature punch. Everybody knows, everybody rants and raves about how Gennady Golovkin fires the jab at twice the middleweight average, and in doing so, he accomplishes quite a bit. Good jab. Firing a jab and consistently firing it, not abandoning your jab, allows you to control the distance at which a fight is being fought while simultaneously disarming an opponent, because in you consistently firing that jab, you're not giving him the opportunity to fire anything back. And if it so happens to penetrate the guard, Golovkin's jab is a hard enough stick that it actually accumulates damage. And it was strange to see that, you know, throughout the course of the fight, it didn't last very long, but it was strange to see that throughout the course of the fight, you know, his jab, it wasn't as ever present as it normally is. Now, what we did see from Golovkin, which we haven't seen in a while, was body punching. in both of those Canelo Álvarez fights, a lot of people made light, including myself, of how Golovkin didn't go to Canelo's body. Now, that could be a result of Canelo Álvarez's defense, his upper body movements, and his counterpunching. That could be as a result of that. But better still, a lot of people wondered what happened to the body attack. And what we saw last night was some good body punches. Good shots downstairs, take the wind out of a guy. And what I did like from Gennady Golovkin is he wasn't just focused on one area. He throw shots downstairs, throw shots upstairs, keep mixing it up to keep the guy guessing. Steve Rolls, he did his best as he could to contend. Now, I will say that Steve Rolls was getting off some shots. He's getting off some interesting punches. Demetrius Andrade himself made light of this via Twitter, how Gennady Golovkin got hit with something like 37 or 38 punches in the course of 3.5 rounds. And in hindsight, when you put it together that Golovkin's not using his jab as much as he normally does, and he's actually going downstairs more than he has in recent memory, that creates an environment to where, Golovkin's taking punishment. He can deal with it. He still seems to have that granite chin. I mean, there was one shot in the fight, one combination from Steve Rolls that was particularly eye-catching. It was a jab and a straight followed by another jab that ended up snapping back Golovkin's head. He took the shot. He dealt with the shot. It didn't seem to bother him, but it did snap his head back quite visibly. A 1-2-1 combination. And I think that, those shots that Steve Rolls was managing to get off were as a result of Golovkin not using his jab in as high abundance as he normally does. Now, I don't know if that's a byproduct of ring rust, or maybe they were working on different things in this camp, because this camp is with Jonathan Banks, whereas, before it was all about Abel Sanchez. I don't know if this is as a result of ring rust or experimentation, but better still, if you're noticing that Golovkin got hit something like 37 to 38 times throughout the course of what are 3.5 rounds, him not using his jab as much as he normally does might have something to do with it. Hey, look, I don't give a fuck if you're a Golovkin fan, a Golovkin critic. I don't care if you're president of the Golovkin fan club. He was taking punishment in this fight, and his granite chin was put on full display. He didn't seem at all fazed by what punches were getting through, but better still, the shots, they were getting through. So that's got to count for something. That has to denote something, and people noticed. Demetrius Andrade noticed. WBO middleweight champion Demetrius Andrade noticed, and it's something myself that I noticed it too. He was getting hit.
He was.
Now, along with other of last night's highlights, Golovkin's, one of, I should say, because he's got signature moves, and one of those signature moves is something I like to classify as a ascending and descending hook. Golovkin, he's one of the few guys I've ever seen that fires shots in this way, to where the punch has a descending trajectory. It's a looping shot, a form of a looping hook, but rather than your normal horizontal kind of trajectory to where it may be sailing around the guard, around it, make contact with the guy's head, Golovkin fires his in such a way to where it descends as he's firing it, fooling a guy, because a guy, he might be in a high guard, he's got the mitts on, he's trying to protect himself, he's covering up, and the shot comes from above. You punch a guy right in the fucking forehead with a shot like that. And, for Steve Rolls, he found out just what that kind of a shot can do, because that's what disoriented him, that's what hurt him, and that's what opened the door for Gennady Golovkin to follow up with another big left hand. So ultimately, my reaction to last night's fight is, it's the outcome that I expected. It's more or less what I thought I was going to see. But if you're looking for answers to certain questions as far as what does Gennady Golovkin really have left at this point, Steve Rolls, he's not the guy that's going to answer that question for you.
That's a tune-up fight.
It's a nice addition of the highlight reel. It's a nice comeback KO, but Steve Rolls himself does not pose the kind of resistance that would answer those questions. So Golovkin knocking him out, regardless of how he looked, regardless of what differences and nuances, changes, alterations, just the act of Golovkin knocking him out does not answer the kinds of questions, give you the kind of answers that you're looking for.
Get the win, you shake off some of the rust. Who do you want to fight next?
Everybody knows. Of course, guys, I'm ready to September. I'm ready to Canelo. Just bring him. Just ask him. I'm ready. Today I stay here. Just please, guys. Just if you want look big drama show, please tell him.
Do you believe that Canelo will fight you next?
I believe, because this is boxing. This is boxing business. Why not?
You fought him twice. You believe you won both fights. It was a draw officially. You lost on the scorecards. Do you think you need to do anything differently if you fight Canelo again?
Right now I had good experience. No, of course, like third fight is more interesting. Probably he's coming to open, I come to open because we have a good experience both, just next fight is amazing for us.
Now, one question did get answered in last night's fight. Post-fight, Gennady Golovkin made his intentions very clear as far as what he wants to do from here on out. There was a question mark hanging over his head, him having recently signed a multi-fight deal with DAZN. Just what exactly is Gennady Golovkin building up towards? What does he want to do? And we found out what he wants to do. There was a lot of speculation, a lot of fights that fans were volunteering that they would like to see him in and some that they wouldn't. And apparently what Gennady Golovkin himself has on his mind is a rubber match with Canelo Álvarez.
Yeah.
He wants it to go down in September. He thinks the time is right. Why not? As he says. Tell you what, he might find that hard to do given Oscar de la Coca's tweet immediately after that. He reacted to that almost immediately, and he says, nice comeback win. Now fight a real fighter, win a belt, and I'll consider doing the third fight. Hashtag Canelo is your boss. And you know what, look, I'm not a proponent of the shenanigans, the chicanery, the politics, and the bullshit that goes on in the sport of boxing. I'm not a proponent of any of those things. But when Oscar de la Hoya says that Canelo is Gennady Golovkin's boss, there might actually be something to that. Because after everything that's already happened, from the first fight into the second fight, and what Gennady Golovkin appears to want, a third fight.
Another one?
From all the things that have happened, if Gennady Golovkin is still chasing around Canelo Álvarez, he is thereby allowing himself to be subject to what Canelo wants and to what Oscar wants. And in that way, it does give off an air that, yeah, Canelo's like your fucking boss. You're allowing this guy to dictate what remains of your career. He is still the focal point of your efforts, and given everything that's already happened in the first fight and the second, the first fight being the more controversial of the two, the first fight who I myself scored in favor of Gennady Golovkin, among many others. And even in the second fight, there was that argument, although I would say that the second fight was a much closer fight than the first, and you could argue that the fight was so close it could have swung either way. But the first fight, well, I'll just go as far as saying
Robbery.
I looked at that as a clear and apparent robbery. But better still, with all these things in mind and everything that's happened, the fact that Gennady Golovkin himself feels that he won both those fights. If you're chasing this guy around after all that shit has already happened,
You're still chasing.
you're asking for it. You're doing it to yourself. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice,
Shame on me.
shame on me. Fool me 3 times, now I'm just asking for it. And you know what? That's what Gennady Golovkin's doing. He's asking for it. I mean, if you yourself, never mind the fans, the pundits, the media, never mind them, if you yourself feel that you won the first 2 fights and you got robbed, then what exactly do you think's gonna happen in a third? Seems to me that Golovkin is cashing out. And I said this before, that at this stage, Golovkin is entering what are the final stages of his career, and that's what this Steve Rolls fight is. That's what it heralds. The final stages of Gennady Golovkin's career. So with those statements in mind, in junction with what he said post-fight, seems to me that it's not even about winning or losing against Canelo Álvarez anymore. He's just whoring himself for one last payday. So you'll excuse me when I say that I have no interest in a rubber match, because I think that Gennady Golovkin is pursuing a rubber match for all the wrong reasons. That he's just looking for a check. And if he is in fact just looking for a check, well, that saps the competitive element that the fans pay to see. We want to watch a contest, and I'm sure the fighters want to get paid. Everybody gets what they want. But when you got a guy who says he's been robbed 2 times already, and he's lining himself up for a third fight, you have to really wonder where his head is, what his intentions are, and what's the fight gonna look like? I mean, what else is there to do? You feel this guy robbed you 2 times already, so you want to fight him a third time? What are the odds that Gennady Golovkin knocks out Canelo Álvarez in a rubber match? You're an older man now than you were in the first fight. You didn't get it done then. You didn't get it done in the second fight. So what, we're supposed to believe you're going to get it done in the third?
Damn it.
Let's be realistic here, people. I think that there are more intriguing situations for both Canelo Álvarez and Gennady Golovkin at this point in the juncture. It being that Canelo says he wants to pursue being an undisputed middleweight champion before the year is out. Well, I'd rather see that. I'd rather see Canelo versus Andrade than a 3-peat with Gennady Golovkin. In turn, when it comes to Triple G, I've maintained my position throughout that, look, In many ways, Golovkin already conquered the middleweight division. But what about the super middleweight division? Is a Callum Smith fight too much to ask for? Because I am genuinely intrigued as to how a matchup like that would play out. And there's money in it. I'm sure the good people over there in the UK would pack out the house to see a fight like that, with a name like Gennady Golovkin against one of their own, Callum Smith, a very formidable and big guy. For the longest time, people have been asking Triple G to make good on his word that anybody from 154 to 168 could get it. So, go do that. I think that's an intriguing situation. You done did what you had to do with Canelo Álvarez. But at this point, there's really not that much intrigue. And I dare say, I dare ask, is there even really still a demand for that fight? Well, what would you rather see in September? Canelo versus Andrade or Canelo versus Golovkin 3? I mean, in all seriousness, as a boxing fan, what grabs your attention more? Canelo versus Andrade for the undisputed middleweight championship, or a three-peat? A rubber match with Gennady Golovkin? What really grabs your attention? There are certain realities to be addressed here regardless of what your opinions are. That even if you'd like to see them fight for a third time, at the end of the day, Oscar De La Hoya is putting distance between Golovkin and Canelo fighting for a third time. He is. He told that guy in plain English, go fight a real fighter, pick up a world title, and we'll consider it. Those are the facts. That's what he said. And you can't discount what he said because, he is the one that would orchestrate that situation. So if he's putting distance between Golovkin and Canelo fighting for a third time, maybe Triple G should take the hint. Maybe he should find something else to do, someone else to fight, maybe another weight class to conquer. You say a guy robbed you 2 times, you know you're not going to win a points decision against this guy. The judges are never going to score it in your favor because you beat him already and all they gave you was a draw. You've been through this. Nothing short of a knockout, a cold knockout, is going to win you a fight against Canelo Álvarez. And you know what? Like it or not, he's a hard guy to hurt. He's already proven to be a hard guy to knock out in 2 outings. So what, you think you're going to do it in a third when you're 37 years old? It's time to move on, Gennady Golovkin. Maybe someone needs to send him the memo. Fax it over. It's time to move on. That's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree. But one thing that you can't disagree about, one thing that's not subject to debate, is Oscar De La Hoya told that guy to go pick up a belt. And unless he plans on fighting Demetrius Andrade for his, well, I don't see how he's going to get that rubber match.